Admiral Calthor sat at the helm of the Galactic Empire's command center, his face etched with a mix of boredom and irritation. His hand drummed lightly against the polished steel armrest of his chair as a junior officer approached with a data tablet in hand. The officer, barely containing his smirk, handed over the report. Calthor skimmed through it, his brow furrowing slightly before a derisive snort escaped his lips. "A small fleet of human warships, you say?" Calthor's voice was thick with amusement. "Approaching our border?" The words hung in the air like a joke waiting for its punchline. Around him, other high-ranking officers chuckled, exchanging knowing glances. Calthor tossed the tablet back to the officer, barely looking up. "Pathetic," he muttered, leaning back in his chair. Another officer, Commander Drex, joined in the laughter, his grin wide. "Humans and their primitive toys. They have no idea what they're stepping into," he added, his tone dripping with condescension. The room buzzed with smug confidence, the kind that only came from years of unquestioned dominance. For the Empire, humans were little more than an afterthought, an insignificant species clinging to their homeworld. Calthor nodded, indulging in their shared mockery. "They must think themselves clever, approaching us like this. Perhaps they hope to surprise us with some quaint maneuver," he said, sarcasm coloring his words. "Well, we should give them a welcome they won't forget." The room erupted into more laughter, the sound bouncing off the cold metallic walls. The officers turned their attention to the large holographic display dominating the center of the room. It showed a cluster of tiny blips moving steadily toward the Empire's outer rim. The human fleet. They were indeed small, no more than a few dozen ships, and to the Empire's elite, they appeared laughably outdated. The Empire's ships, in contrast, were marvels of engineering, sleek, heavily armed, equipped with the most advanced weaponry and shields in the known galaxy. Calthor allowed himself a brief moment to bask in the power he commanded. His fleet consisted of thousands of warships, each one a fortress in space, capable of leveling entire planets if necessary. His officers were the best trained in the galaxy, veterans of countless battles, their skills honed to a deadly edge. They were unbeatable, and they knew it. It was their birthright, their destiny, to rule. Humans were just another species too naive to know their place. "Send a small contingent," Calthor ordered with a wave of his hand. "Just enough to remind them of their place." His voice was calm, almost dismissive, as if he were ordering a minor cleanup rather than a military operation. "We don't need our full might for this. Let's not waste fuel and firepower on these insects." The command was met with nods of approval. Drex grinned. 5 cruisers and a destroyer should be more than enough," he suggested, his eyes glinting with amusement. "Give them a little show, nothing more." Calthor nodded in agreement. "Precisely. Show them a glimpse of our might and send them scurrying back to their backwater planet." A chorus of agreement swept through the room. They had faced countless enemies before, species with far more advanced technologies and strategies, and all had fallen before them. What chance did the humans stand? This was almost beneath them, an errand rather than a battle. Calthor's lips curled into a smile. "Prepare the ships. Let's give them something to laugh about," he added, a dark amusement in his tone. The officers dispersed, some still chuckling as they went about their tasks. The command center buzzed with a sense of easy confidence, an air of superiority that was as thick as the steel walls around them. To them, the outcome was a foregone conclusion. The human fleet would be crushed, their ships turned to space debris, their crews left floating in the void. Calthor watched them go, leaning back in his chair, his eyes drifting back to the display of the human ships. He felt no fear, no anxiety. The humans were nothing, a footnote in the grand saga of the Empire's conquests. "Fools!" he muttered under his breath, his tone laced with contempt. "They should have stayed on their little rock." He turned away from the display, already losing interest. The battle would be over before it began. The human fleet would be scattered, their foolish attempt at defiance crushed under the Empire's heel. Calthor allowed himself a chuckle, a low, rumbling sound that echoed in the vast command center. The humans had no idea what awaited them. And soon they would learn. Without another word, he rose from his chair and strode away, confident that his orders would be carried out. Behind him, the officers were already making preparations, their voices filled with the same derisive laughter. It was a sound that filled the room, a sound of certainty, of arrogance, of an empire that had never known defeat. Captain Morgan stood at the bridge of his ship, eyes focused on the vast darkness ahead. To an untrained observer, the human fleet seemed almost laughable, a small collection of warships, their design appearing simplistic and outdated compared to the sleek, intimidating vessels of the Galactic Empire. But appearances were deceiving. Morgan knew that every inch of these ships had been meticulously crafted for this very moment. The crew moved with a quiet efficiency, their expressions calm and focused. There was no need for loud commands or frantic preparations. They had rehearsed this operation countless times. They were aware of the odds, aware of what they were up against, but there was no fear. Instead, a sense of calm determination filled the air, an unspoken understanding that they were about to surprise an enemy who thought them inferior. Morgan's second in command, Lieutenant Reyes, approached, her voice steady. "We're approaching the Empire's border. No sign of any interceptors yet." Her words were clipped, professional, but there was a flicker of anticipation in her eyes. They both knew the Empire would soon notice them. The Empire always watched its borders, arrogant but not careless. Morgan nodded, his expression unreadable. "Maintain our course. No transmissions. Keep everything silent," he ordered softly. The fleet continued to glide slowly toward the border, maintaining perfect formation, their engines humming quietly, almost undetectable. The radio silence was deliberate, a tool to create unease. The less the Empire knew, the more likely they were to underestimate them, to see them as insignificant. Inside the Empire's command center, the initial scans came back with little to report. The human fleet seemed almost too ordinary, too small. The Empire's sensors picked up nothing unusual, no heavy weaponry, no significant energy signatures. Just a handful of ships moving steadily toward their territory. The Empire's officers dismissed the reports, reinforcing their belief that the humans were no real threat. Reyes leaned in closer to Morgan. "They don't suspect a thing," she whispered, a small smile tugging at her lips. Morgan allowed himself a brief nod of satisfaction. The Empire had grown complacent, and that complacency would be their undoing. They were looking for a threat they could see, something obvious, something they were used to fighting. But the humans were offering none of that. The tension inside the human ships was palpable, not from fear but from anticipation. Every crew member was alert, hands hovering over controls, eyes scanning monitors. They were waiting for the moment when the Empire would make their move. The air was thick with a silent excitement, a readiness that had been forged through months of preparation. Without warning, a signal burst through the static, a brief, simple sound that echoed across the communication channels of both fleets. It was a laugh, soft at first, then growing louder. The sound was cryptic, unexpected, and it caught the Empire off guard. In the command center, the officers paused, exchanging puzzled glances. They hadn't expected this, hadn't prepared for a taunt. For a moment, confusion replaced their arrogance. "Is this some kind of joke?" one of the Empire's officers muttered, his brows furrowed in disbelief. The laugh continued, a low, unsettling sound that seemed to mock their very existence. Admiral Calther's face twisted in annoyance. "They think they can mock us?" he spat, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes, a tiny crack in the Empire's facade of confidence. Morgan could almost feel the confusion radiating from the Empire's ships. He imagined their disbelief, their uncertainty. He glanced at Reyes, and she nodded. "Send it again," he said quietly. The laugh echoed once more across the channels, this time louder, more confident. The Empire's sensors swept over the human fleet again, but still, they found nothing out of the ordinary. There were no detectable energy spikes, no unusual movement patterns. Just a small fleet moving steadily forward, as if daring them to respond. Calther's frustration grew. "They're toying with us," he growled. "Find out what they're hiding." The Empire's ships intensified their scans, probing deeper, searching for any sign of hidden weaponry or technology. But there was nothing, or at least, nothing they could perceive. The human ships remained cloaked in a layer of enigma, their true nature hidden behind a facade of simplicity. The Empire had no idea they were looking at ships equipped with a cloaking technology so advanced, it rendered them almost invisible to traditional sensors. Morgan watched the Empire's futile efforts with a quiet satisfaction. The technology was working perfectly. The cloaking devices, developed in secret and perfected through countless trials, were doing their job. The Empire was blind, stumbling around in the dark, searching for an enemy they couldn't see. And that was exactly how he wanted it. Rhea spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're confused. You can see it in their movements." Morgan nodded. "Good. Let them wonder. Let them doubt. The more they do, the more they'll make mistakes." And mistakes were exactly what the humans were counting on. They needed the Empire to underestimate them, to dismiss them as a joke. The longer they could maintain that illusion, the better their chances. It was a game of patience, a dance in the shadows, and the humans were leading. As the human fleet continued its approach, the air grew thick with tension. Every second of silence was another second of doubt seated in the minds of the Empire's commanders. The humans knew they were being watched, analyzed, dissected. They wanted that. They wanted the Empire to focus on what they could see, not what was hidden. Morgan turned his attention back to the void, his expression calm but focused. He knew the Empire was still laughing, but he also knew something else. Laughter could quickly turn to silence, and silence to fear. It was just a matter of time before the Empire would realize they were not facing a mere nuisance, but an opponent who had mastered the art of the unseen. The Empire's contingent fleet, 5 cruisers and a destroyer, closed in on the human warships with a confidence that bordered on recklessness. Admiral Calthor watched from the command center, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. This was supposed to be a demonstration of power, a swift and decisive show of force to remind these humans of their place. The order to engage was given, and the Empire's ships surged forward, weapons systems primed and ready. The first volley of plasma blasts erupted from the Imperial ships, streaking through the void with a deadly precision aimed squarely at the human fleet. For a moment there was silence, a heartbeat of anticipation. Then, in an instant, the human ships vanished. It wasn't a retreat, nor a defensive maneuver. They simply blinked out of existence, leaving nothing but empty space where they had been just moments before. Calthor's smile faltered. What is this?" he muttered, leaning forward, his eyes narrowing at the display. Confusion rippled through the Empire's ranks. The sensors showed nothing, no signatures, no energy trails, nothing to indicate where the humans had gone. It was as if they had never been there. "Where are they?" Calthor demanded, a hint of urgency creeping into his voice. His officers scrambled, fingers flying over control panels, trying to make sense of the impossible. The human ships had simply disappeared, leaving the Empire's cruisers hanging in space like targets in a shooting gallery. "Scans are coming up blank," one officer reported, a tremor of unease in his tone. "No signs of cloaking, no ion trails, nothing." Calthor's jaw clenched. "Impossible." "Keep looking," he barked, but there was no hiding the unease in his voice now. The arrogance that had filled the room just moments ago was rapidly evaporating. Suddenly, without warning, the human ships reappeared. They were close, too close, emerging from the darkness like ghosts. Before the Empire's ships could react, a barrage of missiles and laser fire erupted from the human fleet. The precision was staggering. The first wave of missiles tore through the Empire's cruisers, breaching hulls, detonating engines, and sending debris spiraling into the void. The destroyer shuddered violently as its shields buckled under the assault. Panic spread through the Empire's fleet like wildfire. "Evasive maneuvers!" Calthor shouted, his voice now laced with a mixture of shock and fury. The Imperial ships tried to scatter, but the human fleet moved with a coordination and speed that defied logic. It was as if they knew every move the Empire would make before they made it. The comm channels crackled to life again, and that same mocking laughter echoed through the Empire's ships, louder this time, bolder. It was a taunt, a challenge, and it struck a chord of fear among the Empire's ranks. Calthor's fists clenched, his face flushed with anger. "They're mocking us!" he roared, slamming his hand against the console. His officers were no longer laughing. Fear had crept into their eyes, the confidence shattered by the unexpected turn of events. "Re-establish targeting locks!" Calthor commanded, but the sensors were scrambled, overwhelmed by a sudden burst of electronic interference. The human ships darted in and out of the Empire's formation, striking with lethal precision and disappearing again before any countermeasures could be deployed. One by one, the Empire's cruisers were being torn apart. Explosions rippled through their hulls as the human ships exploited every weakness, every gap in their defenses. Calthor's heart pounded in his chest. This wasn't a fluke, this was a strategy, a well-executed plan that was dismantling his fleet piece by piece. "How are they doing this?" he hissed, more to himself than anyone else. There was no answer, just the sound of alarms and the frantic chatter of his officers trying to regain control of a situation spiraling out of hand. The humans struck again, another volley of missiles and laser fire finding their marks with uncanny accuracy. The Empire's ships were floundering, their superior numbers and firepower rendered useless against an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't predict. Calthor's face twisted in frustration and disbelief. "Call for reinforcements," he ordered, his voice tight. "We need more ships." A junior officer hesitated for a moment, glancing at the chaos unfolding on the screens. "Sir, are you sure?" Calthor shot him a glare that could melt steel. "Now!" The order was relayed, and a distress signal was sent out, calling for backup from the Empire's nearest outposts. Meanwhile, the human fleet continued its relentless assault, moving like phantoms through the Imperial formation, each attack more devastating than the last. The laughter came again, echoing louder, more confident, almost jubilant. The Empire's crews began to realize they were not facing a ragtag group of upstarts. This was a fleet with technology and tactics far beyond what they had imagined. For the first time, true fear crept into the eyes of the Imperial officers. "They're playing with us," one officer whispered, a note of terror in his voice. Calthor ignored him, his mind racing. He needed to buy time, needed to regroup. "Pull back," he ordered. "Fall into defensive positions. We hold until reinforcements arrive." But even as he spoke, he knew it would be a struggle. The humans were moving too quickly, too unpredictably. They were everywhere and nowhere at once, striking with precision and vanishing before the Empire could retaliate. Reinforcements arrived with a flash, the Empire's most formidable warships emerging from hyperspace, their massive hulls bristling with weaponry. The new fleet dwarfed the original contingent, their sheer size and power meant to overwhelm any opponent. Admiral Calthor felt a surge of relief. This was the turning point he had been waiting for. With these reinforcements, the humans would have no choice but to retreat or be obliterated. The Empire's confidence surged once more, the balance of power seemed restored. But the humans didn't retreat. They didn't even flinch. The moment the reinforcements appeared, the human fleet shifted, adapting with a speed and precision that caught the Empire off guard yet again. The human ships split into smaller groups, each maneuvering with surgical accuracy. They weaved through the gaps between the Empire's warships, darting in and out like phantoms. The cloaking technology masked their movements, leaving the Empire's sensors struggling to keep up. The humans were playing a game of cat and mouse, but it was increasingly unclear who was the cat and who was the mouse. Calthor watched in frustration as his new ships struggled to lock onto targets. "Focus all firepower on those flanks," he ordered, his voice tense. The Imperial fleet unleashed a torrent of plasma and laser fire, but the humans were too quick, too nimble. They evaded the attacks effortlessly, slipping past the Empire's formations with a fluidity that seemed almost unreal. Every time an Imperial ship managed to get a target in its sights, the human ships vanished, only to reappear moments later in a different position, launching another devastating strike. The Empire's warships, built for large-scale, direct confrontations, were ill-suited to counter these hit-and-run tactics. They were slow to turn, their heavy armaments and shields meant for a different kind of battle. As the human fleet danced around them, the Empire's crews found themselves struggling to keep up, their once vaunted technology rendered almost useless. The larger warships, intended to crush the enemy with overwhelming force, were reduced to clumsy giants swatting at shadows. Calthor's frustration mounted. "Why can't we hit them?" he shouted, slamming his fist onto the console. An officer replied, his voice strained. "Their maneuvers, it's like they're predicting our every move." Calthor's face darkened. He realized now that they were facing an enemy who was far more sophisticated than he had ever anticipated. The humans were using a combination of advanced cloaking technology and unparalleled maneuverability to run circles around the Empire's fleet. And then, the laughter started again. This time, it wasn't just mocking, it was taunting, a relentless sound that echoed through the Empire's communication channels. It grew louder with every missed shot, every failed maneuver, every moment of hesitation. It seeped into the minds of the Imperial crews, gnawing at their nerves, feeding on their doubts. Calthor could feel the tension in the command center, a growing unease that spread like a virus. The humans were not just outmaneuvering them, they were playing with them, toying with their minds. A junior officer, pale and visibly shaken, turned to Calthor. "Sir, we're receiving multiple distress signals from the outer flanks. They're being picked off one by one." Calthor's eyes narrowed. He knew he was losing control of the situation, and the psychological pressure was taking its toll on his crew. The laughter continued, louder now, almost mocking their every move. The fear was palpable, and the arrogance that had once filled the room had turned to desperation. Calthor clenched his teeth, his mind racing. He needed to end this, and quickly. "All ships, prepare for a full-scale assault," he commanded, his voice carrying a mixture of fury and determination. "We hit them with everything we have. No more games." The order was relayed, and the Empire's fleet began to shift, forming into an attack formation. The humans, seemingly sensing the change, adapted once more, their ships fanning out, preparing for what was to come. The Empire's ships surged forward, weapons blazing. It was a desperate move, a final attempt to overwhelm the human fleet with sheer force. But the humans were ready. They darted between the gaps, exploiting every weakness, every blind spot. They struck hard and fast, targeting key systems, crippling the Empire's ships with precision strikes that left them vulnerable and exposed. The laughter echoed again, more confident than ever. Calthor's hands trembled with rage. "Enough!" he shouted, his voice echoing in the command center. "All units, converge! Crush them!" His desperation was evident, his orders more frantic. The Empire's fleet pushed forward with all its might, but the humans remained one step ahead, their tactics fluid and unpredictable. Explosions rocked the Imperial ships as they tried to close the distance, but they were met with devastating counterattacks. The human fleet moved like a swarm, striking and vanishing, always just out of reach. Calthor could see the fear in his officers' eyes, the realization that they were losing this battle, not because they lacked firepower, but because they were fighting an enemy who refused to fight on their terms. Minutes felt like hours as the battle raged on. The humans continued their relentless assault, their laughter a constant reminder of the Empire's failing strategy. Calthor's frustration turned to desperation. He had risked everything on this attack, and now it was falling apart. His fleet, his pride, his invincible armada, was being torn to shreds by an enemy he had dismissed as insignificant. "Pull back! Regroup!" Calthor finally ordered, his voice strained. But it was too late. The humans had them surrounded, their tactics had worn down the Empire's fleet, their confidence shattered, their strength diminished. The Empire's fleet gathered for one last desperate push. Admiral Calthor, his face a mask of grim determination, barked orders over the calm channels, his voice strained but resolute. He knew this was their final chance. All remaining ships were to converge on the human fleet, unleash every weapon, every ounce of firepower they had left. It was a full-scale assault, an attempt to overwhelm the humans with sheer numbers and force. This was not about strategy anymore, it was about survival. The Imperial ships surged forward, their engines roaring, their weapons blazing. Plasma cannons fired in unison, and missiles streaked across the void. The humans, however, were ready. They had anticipated this final move. With a fluidity that defied understanding, the human ships split apart, forming into smaller units that danced around the Empire's fleet. Their cloaking technology flickered on and off, confusing the Empire's targeting systems, making it nearly impossible to land a solid hit. Then came the counterattack. It was precise, surgical. The humans struck at the Empire's weakest points, targeting critical systems with a terrifying accuracy. Explosions rippled across the Imperial warships as the humans' weapons found their marks again and again. Engines were destroyed, weapon systems disabled, shields breached. The Empire's fleet began to fracture, their formation breaking apart as panic set in. Calthor watched in horror as his ships were decimated. One by one, they were torn apart, their hulls splitting, venting fire and debris into the cold expanse of space. The humans moved like a predator circling wounded prey, striking with lethal intent and then vanishing before the Empire could mount a defense. They were everywhere and nowhere, an unstoppable force that the Empire's might could not match. The Imperial commanders shouted orders, trying to regain control, but it was no use. The humans had anticipated every move, every strategy. The Empire's once imposing armada was reduced to chaos, their superior numbers and firepower meaningless against the human fleet's agility and cunning. Calthor's heart pounded in his chest as he saw ship after ship fall to the relentless assault. His own command ship shuddered under the impact of another strike, alarms blaring, red lights flashing. The laughter echoed again, louder, more confident, and filled with a sense of victory. It cut through the calm channels like a blade, a mocking reminder of how thoroughly the Empire had been outmaneuvered, outthought, and outfought. Calthor's hands trembled as he gripped the edge of his console, the reality of the situation crashing down around him. His fleet, his invincible force, was being destroyed in front of his eyes. "Pull back!" he shouted, but it was already too late. The human ships closed in, delivering the final blows with a cold efficiency. The Imperial fleet, once the pride of the galaxy, was reduced to a handful of crippled ships, barely capable of sustaining themselves, let alone continuing the fight. Calthor's own ship was hit again, a massive explosion rocking the hull, sending him sprawling to the floor. As he struggled to his feet, blood trickling down his forehead, he heard it. The final broadcast from the human fleet. It was a simple message, transmitted across all channels, clear and calm. "Never underestimate us." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning, a statement of defiance, of victory. Calthor's eyes burned with a mixture of rage and humiliation. He had been bested by an enemy he had deemed unworthy, his arrogance leading him to this moment of defeat. He watched helplessly as the human fleet began to pull away, their ships disappearing one by one back into the vastness of space. They had made their point, delivered their message, and now they were leaving, victorious and unscathed. The Empire was left in ruins, their once mighty armada reduced to wreckage and ruin. The command center was silent, the air thick with the smell of smoke and the sound of distant alarms. Calthor looked around at his officers, their faces pale and stunned. The laughter was gone now, replaced by a profound silence, a heavy weight that pressed down on everyone present. The consequences of their arrogance, their dismissal of the human threat, were clear. Calthor sank back into his chair, the reality of their defeat settling in. They had been arrogant, blind to the possibility that a species they had dismissed as primitive could hold such power, such resolve. His pride, his certainty in the Empire's invincibility, had led them to this moment, a moment that would be remembered as the Empire's greatest humiliation. The human fleet disappeared into the stars, leaving behind a broken and battered enemy to contemplate the cost of their arrogance.